we felt like from a BEMO security, we had been developing our own baseline for the last 10 years, and we were very happy with it. But we felt like at the time of going to CMMC, you said, hey, this is my BEMO baseline and how I came up with it. Or I'm using out of the box the Microsoft baseline. So we made the decision to go Microsoft, which we felt was very good because, again, the assessor don't question it's Microsoft baseline. This removed a lot of noise into the whole system, but we did that like a week before going.
Welcome to Trust Issue by BEMO, the podcast where we go beyond checkbox compliance and get real about security. In every episode, we will break down what's happening in the world of CMMC, cybersecurity, and GRC, straight from the people building, auditing, and living it. Real conversation about real security.
All right, let's introduce our panel. We have Bruno. He is the co-host and BEMO's CEO and CISO. We have David, who is our senior delivery consultant. Cindy, who is our senior director of operations. Shamiso, who is our senior security administrator. Ademar, our senior data scientist. Sylwia, our senior director of people. And Cata, who is our security and IT administrator.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I decided this week to bring the team that was involved during the CMMC Level 2 certification. We thought this time around we'd get everybody's kind of collect a bunch of responses from everybody, kind of see what their experience was like. Because this wasn't just like a one-person show. There was a lot of different people involved, a lot of different roles. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go down. We kind of collected responses, some broad themes, and I decided to kind of pick a couple that I thought were pretty interesting. All right, so let's get ready, everybody. All right, so the first question I'm going to ask is the first question was, what's one thing you wish you had known earlier in the audit process? And both Ademar and Cata had something that was a really similar responses, which was we should decide kind of what controls evidence-wise get viewed in a document versus what gets shown live. So maybe both of you want to talk about like what your experience was like there and why maybe one versus the other makes things more challenging.
Yeah, I can go ahead, start. So I think what was interesting is that during the live audit, since we go control by control and then the sub-processors within those controls, you kind of have to switch very fast between evidence types. So for example, you may have control 3.4.1 and then first line item is if X process is defined. And then in that case, you need to show your policy or your procedure and it is signed or not. The next one, letter B, must be, show evidence on how you track that. So maybe that's a ticket evidence on you get the alert, you track the alert, you respond to the alert, or you ask you to show the configuration itself. So this is where, you would live screen Intune and then go into the actual configuration and then show that to the auditor. So I think you have to be really prepared on switching between evidence types from your signed policies to live Intune configuration to signed procedures to your ticketing system. It pretty much goes, balls around the entire court.
Is that something that you guys know ahead of time, or is it just like the auditor puts you on the spot and says, oh, actually this thing in the document isn't good enough, can you switch to live?
Beforehand because everything is based on your SSP. So if you tell in your SSP that you define certain process in your policy, that that's where you're going to show. But then as you're showing the evidence, auditor may also jump in with extra questions if they think what you're showing or what you have defined is not sufficient for that control. So everything that you define in your SSP is pretty much what you have to show, but then there's also, if that is not enough, you may be prompted to extra questions and need to be ready to show those.
And so are you guys coordinating between yourselves? Like, do you guys all just have like 100 tabs open like at all time? And it's just like, sometimes Kata's like, oh, I got this one. Or Ademar's like, I got this one.
Yeah, so there is a teamwork, right? So we had several meetings, weekly meetings. We went through so going back to the SSP, I would say be careful of what you're asking for in an SSP because you gotta be prepared to show that, right? So and you have to be fast, right? You cannot just stumble around and go, oh, is it in Defender? Is it in Baseline? Is it in the, so yeah, we had to answer your question. Yes, we had several meetings. We got prepared. We got screenshots, and basically we also had like a script. Where do I go? What do I do? Sometimes I get, okay, Shamiso, help me out here. you know.
So basically, you already have to have the path of knowing how to, if it's live at least, you already have to know the documented path of how do I get there, the exact clicks, because I can't be messing around live.
You feel like you're in a trial, right? You're on the bench and you have to,
David, you mentioned that you wish you had a greater understanding of how different the CMMC certification audit process was going to differ from I guess the other audits that we've gone through, such as SOC 2, Type 2, ISO 27001. How would we maybe have known that? Known something like that?
Well, if we had read up on CMMC from DoD, we would have noticed that it's much more like I would call an IRS audit. They want to see all of the evidence. They want to see the procedures. They want to know everything. And they go through it point by point on everything. If you go and look at a SOC audit or a ISO audit, it's very, well, let's look at 80% or 60% of the things, and then you will be asked some questions, maybe, if they don't really get it or if they don't really trust your answer. But with the CMMC, you're asked everything. You have to have an answer for everything. And it's very, I would say it's almost invasive, or the other ones were very passive.
Yeah. It's kind of like getting popcorned in class where it's like, okay, maybe you could ask one or two questions. And if I feel like David did his homework last night, then I'm not going to pick on him again. And I'm just going to move on to the next thing. Whereas CMMC, it's very much like, no, you're going to answer every single one of these one by one. Right. Okay, cool. Cindy, you mentioned something that was really interesting to me, and that was the words operating system. That you had talked that you mentioned that CMMC felt way more like building an operating system versus SOC 2 and ISO. What do you mean by that?
So change input. Every change across the policy or across the control groups impacts operation. So whatever you do. So because operations is people, process, technology, everything we look at, it's like, okay, we have to have a process for this. We need to make sure it's documented. And so that impacted the way we operationalize something. So taking a step back and saying, how do we do it today? Can we do it better? Can we automate this? So even in the poem creation, that became, well, we're just not going to write a document. That's just too cumbersome to keep track of, right? So how we come out with the same output, but have it automated for us as part of the work we do. So whenever we come in to enter in a ticket for something or have a risk for something or do a review within our compliance controls, any output of that creates a ticket. That ticket has its categorization. That categorization can then be reported on, and then we can track it in our system. And we don't have a separate kind of ad hoc document that we have to keep track of, right? It's part of the way we do work. So automating and operationalizing the things we do in the context of what CMMC asks us to deliver was another lens that we took, and to minimize the external kind of documentation that would be external from the systems that we use as control groups.
And was a lot of that stuff new for BEMO? Like, was that stuff that we were maybe doing in the past or is different?
No, just I would say that we utilized existing processes we had. We just filled in the blanks, right? Oh, we don't have a category for this. We just need to create a new category of it. Should we have a separate form? Should we use the same form that we're using today? What do we want to trigger off of? So just kind of step by step, going through that process flow and coming up with the best solution. And my partner in crime is always Ademar. And so he and I would work late nights, just kind of like, okay, here's how it's going to work. And then I would give him that. He gets up, he's 2 hours earlier than me or so. And so by morning we would have it done and we would be able to demo and the team would be like, okay, check that one off. We're done. We have this control group's done and it's operationalized now and we have data in it and we can represent it in the audit.
Next question we asked all of you was, from your department's perspective, what was the biggest challenge during CMMC Level 2? Both David and Ademar kind of brought up the same thing, which was configuration management versus change management. So David talked about understanding the difference and relationship between change management and configuration management. And then Ademar brought up that configuration management was the biggest challenge because it required cross-checking policies, procedures, tickets, live Intune entry reviews. So what was, I guess we'll start off with David. What was so challenging between the change management versus configuration management?
Well, in English, change management and configuration management are pretty much the same thing. And the government definitely has a separate understanding of what each one is. And they separate them where, in my mind, they overlapped an awful lot. So we had to come at it from a government perspective, not from our own perspective. And that was a big learning during it because it was one of the biggest areas in the whole CMMC process.
Here at BEMO, change management, we use the ITSM, the IT service model here. And so we had already defined processes for change management in place. And those are being followed, pretty regularly. And our IT security team follows those processes. I think on the configuration management side, we tend to manage everything within our systems and then have the ability to look at things that are fall outside and then resurrect those through ticket management or whatever. So, but we didn't have an actual document, right? And so what the auditors were looking for was, did you document this in an external Excel file or something that you have a baseline configuration management across your system? And then can you show me the changes you've made historically to that configuration or not? Right. And so we had the first part of it in terms of the changes that were coming in and tracking the change approval. We didn't have the outcome of actually putting it in a document and saying, this is now our new baseline. Right. So that was something we had to right size to this particular compliance methodology.
Great. Anything else you'd add, Ademar?
Yes, I think, as David mentioned, I think this is applicable a lot to the configuration management because of the size of it and the amount of sub-process that came with it. But one thing that is true to all controls is that you may have their policy and your procedure and you sign those, you review those yearly and sign those yearly. But then within them, you may have a lot of sub-processes that you document within them and that you require evidence for it. So for example, within configuration management, you have your asset registry, right? And that may be a procedure that you review yearly, but then within the asset registry, you have a lot of sub-items such as the quarterly reconciliation report that you have to compare what is live active in Intune versus your asset registry spreadsheet or inventory and make sure that those are aligned. And then what you define there is that you review those quarterly with your IT team and it's signed by the CISO. So you need evidence for that. So you may need a ticket with a screenshot and a timestamp. And this is just one line item within a procedure within the configuration management. And I think that's the biggest challenge because it's one of the major ones, but that is true to pretty much all the procedures. You also have to keep in mind those line items within your procedure, the who, the what, the when, and the how you do it, and have evidence for that.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds like a lot of extra work. Yes. Cata.
Can I ask you a question? Do you know who's suffering most of after the CMMC implementation? The IT department. I still have a CMMC PTSD suffering recovery. Because when you open the hood and you start implementing all the changes and stuff, you gotta have a lot of people screaming after the fact. So you gotta know how to adjust all these policies. You gotta know how to go around and.
The worst for Cata is the post CMMC.
What, Cata? Tell me, why is it? What has changed in your day-to-day life so much?
Well, because CMMC is so tied up, right? The system that imposes so many restrictive access to everything. WDAC, the application control policy, right? That ties up a lot of and creates a lot of. I'm gonna put a quote unquote noise because people are screaming, "Hey, I'm blocked to install PowerShell module." Okay, go and adjust the policy. And WDAC, it's not an easy policy to manipulate. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm. So things just take a lot longer to go complete, basically.
The system it's very secure. Let me put it that way.
And both you and Bruno talk about changing from, I guess, what BEMO baselines to, I guess, Microsoft's baseline. And you guys did that kind of close to the audits. Why was that something that you guys decided to do?
Yeah, I can tell you. So we felt like, again, from a BEMO security, we had been developing our own baseline for the last 10 years, and we were very happy with it. But we felt like at the time of going to CMMC, what do you say? Say, hey, this is my BEMO baseline and how I came up with it? Or I'm using out of the box the Microsoft baseline. So we made the decision to go Microsoft, which we felt was very good because, again, the assessor don't question, oh, it's Microsoft baseline. I'm not sure, but would have been BEMO, oh, how do you decide that and that and that? So this removed a lot of noise into the whole system, but we did that like a week before going. So it's...
Did that break anything?
I don't think so. WDAC did more damage than the policies.
Well, baseline works hand in hand with WDAC. Let me put it that way. So you kind of have to know where to go and adjust.
Mm-hmm. All right. To the next group of questions. What decision made by another department impacted your work the most during the audits? Bruno talks about how we decided to change our CUI boundary 3 times, which forced us to redo our SSP and all those policies 3 times. And I see everybody kind of laughing and smiling about this. Why is the CUI boundary so important, and why did that mess things up for us?
So I will start and people can comment. So from a BEMO perspective, again, we don't have CUI because, we don't deploy government stuff. So we don't. So we had to think about what does it mean for our customers. So we first designed the baseline for us for BEMO. We were happy with our, our bond. And then, we work with a lead CCA on our side to kind of help us review our boundaries. And after it was discussion, okay, do we care about BEMO or do we care for our customers? And we say, at the end, we are doing that for our customers so that when they will have their CMMC audit, we're back. So we tweak, and we tweak 3 times. So at the end, you change your boundaries, you change your SSP,
What were the 3 different, without going too deep, what were the 3 different kind of scopes that you guys originally went through?
The first one is we're planning on using Prevail. So we say, okay, we'll use Prevail. The second one is, okay, let's just go and do one computer that will have CUI. And at the end, we end up being like, hey, anyone at BEMO can deal with our customer who could handle CUI, which means we could. So it was if, we change the scope. So, and of course, when you do that 3 times, so we know our SSP by heart by now.
Boundary decides what your auditor is going to look at, how deeply they're going to look into you. And if you open it up to, we're going to allow 5 people in our company to store stuff in Prevail, but then anybody could talk to those 5 people. Well, now you've opened up your entire company's IT architecture to be investigated for CMMC. Whereas if you scope it down, then the auditor cannot ask questions outside of that boundary. So it's very important to think of what your boundary is, because that's what you have to expose and answer and be ready to defend. So doing it 3 times from 3 different perspectives changed what we had to look at. And that's just difficult. Don't anybody ever do that.
Go ahead, Shamiso. Go ahead, Shamiso.
Yeah, so just when I add what David has said, if we were decided to just scope to one device, we're just going to have the 110 controls evidence by evidence for that one device. So it was so much better to scope it to everyone so that we show the controls 110 for everyone, because one device, we're just going to do the same thing that we did for the like 20 computers we have. So it was so much easier to do for everyone.
That's interesting. Like, I would have thought that choosing one device or just going with Prevail, the idea is that it would actually make the boundary smaller and simpler by only having one device or whatever. But it seemed like it would actually ended up being easier by just saying everybody could go do it.
Again, to your point, Brandon, it depends from which hat. If it's just for BEMO, Prevail, okay. But once now, next time we have an audit for customer as an audit and has to look at the BEMO IT perspective, then would have fire back at us. So it's kind of, it depends on which hat you put.
Sure. So when our customers get audited and we are the ESP, it will actually be easier for them, or I should say, there's a higher likelihood that they pass because of the way we set up our boundary now.
Yes, they inherit a lot from us.
Now I'm just thinking theoretically now. Potentially there's a lot of contractors kind of down the road, or maybe they have an MSP that said, oh, hey, I got Prevail, or oh, I decided to do it this way. And then they're about to go into their customer's audit and the auditor's now going to have a different opinion and saying, oh, actually that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, they're going to have to justify things that we have already been certified on. We can bypass it by saying we're certified, here's our certification. And if the MSP is not certified, they're going to have to say, hey, now come and audit me. So it's going to be double what our customers do if the MSP is not already certified.
Yeah, if you're a contractor, you probably don't really want to risk that. Because it's not really up to you, right? It's up to your MSP.
No, it's not up to you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Try to tell your MSP how they should run their shop.
And now also keep in mind, BEMO is quote unquote kind of a baseline for our customers. Whatever security we have, that's how we start with, right? And then we customize our customers based on their needs, right? So,
Cindy, if you could redo one part of the process, what would you change?
I think that I would have pulled the team together and we all would have had a NIST 800-171 review session. We would go through the SSP line by line and have interviewed our CCA first to ensure that our boundary was all in, like, looking at things from, as Bruno said, customer and BEMO perspective, and that we are setting ourselves up at first to ensure our boundary was good for our customers, and then we set from there what our policies and procedures would be. That would have prevented our 3-time redo of our boundary. And it would have set the stage for how we need to tackle the control groups and at what level of scrutiny we would have known right up front where we needed to go with that, how we needed to write our policies, and what our procedure base would have to be in order to meet those controls. And if that all in and of itself would have been a good set of time up front, and would have, I don't know if it would have, I think it would have saved us time in rework, certainly on the boundary, and then in tightening our policies and procedures. So we would have known that every single assessment objective, we would need to walk through one by one and test up front. We couldn't assume that, yep, this kind of these procedures and what we do in our systems is enough. It just wasn't enough to have the list into it. We also had to have a separate document. So I think working with our CCA up front would have given us that insight, and we would have been far ahead of the deliverables we bring to the table.
Right. All right. Bring the lead CCA way earlier to get the scope correct so that we don't waste our time doing all this implementation work and all this writing downstream. Yeah. Right. Shamiso.
Yeah, for me, I would say preparing the audits earlier, because we had a lot of sleepless nights trying to get the controls to see is it matching with what Bruno said in the SSP, trying to make the configurations match. So I think that process, if we had done it earlier, it was gonna be better, and at least would have rested, and because we had lots of sleepless nights just to get things in place. So yeah.
So basically, you have the audit, you have the you have the mock audit, and then before that, you would have a pre-audit just internally.
Yeah, so I think preparation early would have made things easier for us from the technical side, and even from Bruno and Cindy, because we're saying, okay, this is not it, we have to change the policy, and Bruno would go and make the change, and then I come back again and say, Bruno, we need this procedure, it's not there. So you'd go again and say, no, we need to tweak this again. So that if we've made met earlier, made the preparations, yeah, it would have made a huge difference.
What about prepping for when you guys had talked about finding the path for if you had to show something live? I would imagine that probably takes a lot of time to go prepare for what do I need to click and what's the path to go show evidence live?
So we had to meet with Cata and Bruno before the audit, because sometimes what we said in SSP, we have to be confident to show it. And sometimes to just, maybe the auditor would say, okay, you mentioned this, but it's not there. But then we have to quick think, to do a quick think, say, okay, the auditor wants this, so what should we show? Where do we go? Because the policy is the baseline, it's a big policy. So we have to know exactly where we should go and click so that we don't take too much time. So the preparation, meeting before the audit, also made a huge difference for us.
Okay, great. Thank you. David, what about you? What would you have done differently?
Same basic thing is that we would have done everything earlier. But the CUI boundary, to me, it was just so eye-opening of how much it can control what the auditor looks at you for, that we should have understood that and prepared for it and had it done before we even went in and started our SSP. We should know what our boundary is and then define it, as opposed to define it and then come back and kind of hope that it's something cohesive.
From my understanding, though, we started in December, so you would have started even earlier?
Well, I would have started in a different way. Okay, we should have gone in knowing a lot more. We were very, very naive going in. And I don't think anybody should ever go in that way, but I can only imagine with the 3,000 companies that are going to have to do this, there's going to be 2,950 that are going to be naive.
Yeah, the interesting the interesting part for me goes to kind of what David was saying was, at the end of the day, from an assessor perspective, we know we had 100% correct on an IT. They say, well, your IT is very good, very, very good. So all our issues were on documentation. And I think it goes back to the best thing we did is at one point, and we hired a lead CCA that was very good that, again, we could ask questions. So we got a question, I think, his name was Nicholas. We were able to make our boundary fixed. And then after that, everything comes together. So if we had to redo it, bring in the lead CCA earlier so you can ask questions outside of your C3PAO and having So this was for me.
It seemed like it was also really good that Nicholas, besides also being a lead CCA, had already been certified himself also. And so it sounds like one of the themes is also being able to use a resource that is already certified actually helps tremendously.
I think the advantage with Nicholas is not only the lead CA, but he's also an IT director. So he has both sides, and he's on Microsoft like us. So it was, again, the perfect combination of...
Ademar, what about you? What would you have done differently going into this?
Well, still keeping in the preparation topic as everyone, but I would say focus on the process side of things. We talked about, Cindy mentioned, and David as well. I think a lot of organizations will face the same, that we may have processes that we do on a... So you have it there, you have it established, you do it even automatically, but from an evidence perspective, you will have artifacts to prove that you do this process. And that is across organizations. So I think my recommendation would be meet with every process leader. So for example, even from an HR perspective during onboarding, who owns this, who owns that, and then make sure that every process that you do have will be able to be, taken for evidence, and you have record for that. So I think a lot of organizations will have the process in place, but they won't have the artifacts to turn that into evidence. And that is like the challenge. So I would say also start early by interviewing and checking all the processes that the organization have, even from an operational perspective.
Sounds like all this prep though requires a lot of free time to go do all that stuff, right? It seems like all this is really eating up a lot of your time the last, let's call it 6 months of generating all these new artifacts, interviewing people, doing an internal audit before the mock audit, right? All those sleepless nights. It sounds like there's sort of just no way of, there's no really shortcut to this. No. All right. Thank you. All right, Sylwia, what would you have done differently going into this?
So same as everyone, bring Nicholas earlier and do the kind of mock of the mock, right? That he was showing us how the auditors will really ask us questions, right? So that was good. But from HR perspective, as we already had a process, but we had to change the process to meet the CMMC requirements, right? So even if we had the process before, the steps are a little bit different and needs to be done before people are joining the company, right? So for me and Cata, actually, we had to sit down and walk through our process, change our process as we work closely together during the onboarding and offboarding. So that was the major change, and I think that for the big company, that could be something that they need to be aware of.
Cool. What about you, Cata? Last but not least.
I think I should maybe redesign the process to lead with the audit story and demo flow, and then build the evidence to support that story.
What is that? What is an audit story?
Not the other way around, right? Not the other way. So go know what the auditor wants. Now we know, right? So now we kind of know, and then start building the evidence based on that flow, right? So, because when we did it, it was like, okay, we start from MSSP. Now is this how we're gonna go about it, or
What is an audit story?
Well, it's basically their script, what they're looking for, right?
So basically putting things in the right order to make things
Right
flow
order,
correctly.
yes. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining. As you can see, it takes a village to go get CMMC level 2 certified. And glad to have everybody here to be able to kind of give their perspectives. And probably change a lot of the ways, probably giving us a lot of ideas on how we'll go implement this across all of our customers. So again, thank you very much and have a great week, everybody.
That is another episode of Trust Issue. In this conversation, help you think differently about compliance, security, or trust. Share it to help someone who is still stuck in a checkbox mode. Each week, we will keep bringing you more episodes, resources, and real-world insight from the BEMO team. Wherever you are listening from, don't forget to rate the podcast and follow us to stay up to date on the latest development in the GRC space. Remember, compliance gets you certified, but real security, that earns trust. Thank you for listening.